And then SMU, speaking of this schedule, kind of a loose takeaway here. Somebody on the Pony Express mentioned that, SMU doesn't have those multiple buys that we saw in the first year of the ACC when SMU had those built-in kind of buys thanks to playing week 0. The way this schedule kind of lays out, there is kind of a little bit of a lull here and there throughout the schedule that does set up pretty well. And you could look at this Syracuse game on the road as one of those based on what they did last year, but not so fast. Steve Angeli, the quarterback for the Orange, will be back as SMU heads up for an October 31st or October 30th matchup at Syracuse in a game that, despite Syracuse losing a lot and making a ton of changes on the coaching staff, Steve Angeli was cooking last year when he was on. So he'll have some new look targets and things like that. Jonte Cook left the program, but Syracuse could be one that is going to give SMU, I think, everything it can handle. A long road trip for SMU going up with Virginia Tech coming to SMU the week after. So it's a lot of things at play from the mental side.
Steve Angeli made or break this team. I mean, you look at that game last year where they did not have Steve Angeli come into Dallas against SMU, and it was all SMU in that one. I do not anticipate that being the case here in 2026. But as I look at the Orange's schedule, so they have a 5-game stretch, really a 6-game stretch that I think is pretty brutal. So they play Louisville at home, at North Carolina, which I expect Bill Belichick and the Tar Heels to turn it around. Get SMU at home on a short week because right now it's listed as a Friday or Saturday game. So it could be a short week. The following week, they play Clemson. And then the week after that, they have to go to NC State, which is always known for taking out teams that, frankly, they shouldn't. So we'll see how Syracuse looks. We'll see how NC State looks. But that is an absolutely brutal stretch for the Orange. And I think they're going to be pretty beat up by the time they get to this game. Even though they're at home, even though they're going to have all things going their way in the Carrier Dome, I agree with what you're saying about how Steve Angeli is going to pull this team in the direction that it looks like they had been going beforehand with Frame Brown. But you just have to always think about that injury piece, because when you're playing some of these really physical football teams, which, don't be mistaken, North Carolina, they were heading in the right direction at the end of the year. It was not the TCU game that defined their season like a lot of people thought it would. They actually ended up beating a couple teams, including, I believe, Syracuse last year. So I'm looking at this stretch more as a whole of what Syracuse is going to be going through rather than what SMU is going to be doing heading into this game.
And speaking of what SMU will be, knowing like what's going on, what with this team and kind of how they could look differently versus their 2025. I mean, SMU hosting Virginia Tech, there could be no greater kind of change in trajectory between programs that SMU will face on this 2026 season than Syracuse and then Virginia Tech. If Syracuse has it going with Steve Angeli, that's their change.